Well, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Haley Pessner and I serve as a manager in the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. We are so glad to have you here with us today. I will be the host of this featured presentation with Dr. Michael Burns, who is the Director of Career Readiness in the Department of Communication Studies at Texas State University. Your microphones will be muted for this presentation, but I encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. Also keep your eye on the chat for a link to a helpful session feedback survey. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Haley, for kicking us off, and welcome everybody. I appreciate you joining us today. My name is Teresa Keurig, and I'm the Director of Faculty Support and Development at Ashford University. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Michael Burns, who is a senior lecturer and the Director of Career Readiness in the Department of Communication Studies at Texas State University. He also serves as the co-director of the College of Fine Arts and Communications Research Program, CoSearch. He teaches several courses, including training and development, small group communication, interpersonal communication, sport communication, leadership, persuasion, and honors courses titled Rehumanizing Communication and Talking Like TED. Dr. Burns also is one of the co-curators for TEDx Texas State University. Dr. Burns's professional experiences outside of academia include working for the NBC Today Show at the 2006 Torino, 2008 Beijing, 2012 London, 2016 Rio de Janeiro, and 2018 Pyeongchang Olympic Games. While at the Today Show, he works on the production management and logistics team while overseeing their intern program. Dr. Burns also worked as a communications specialist for the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. Dr. Burns is an applied communication researcher. He conducts theoretically based research with practical applications. He has published and presented research in the areas of persuasion, message development, higher education and the college transition, narrative influence, interpersonal communication, and family communication. So as you can see, Dr. Burns's combination of experience on the business side of communication studies at the Today Show and at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and his theoretical expertise and ongoing research on messaging and narrative, specifically in the context of higher education and the transition to college, means that his work resides both in the realm of liberal arts theory and concrete career development. He's uniquely positioned to feed our understanding of how to merge these two worlds for the benefit of the student experience and beyond. And on a personal level, I'm particularly excited to have Dr. Burns here because I've known him since we were kids, and I can attest to the fact that his energy and hard work and limitless creativity have been an inspiration to me, and I'm excited for him to inspire you guys today. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm excited to be here. Man, when you read all that, I guess, I've been able to fake it to make it long enough, so I'm glad I'm here. So I appreciate the warm welcome and the warm introduction. And hi, everybody. I know a lot of you are coming in from many different places in the United States, so thank you. No matter what time zone you're in, I'm here in San Marcos, Texas today in my office. We are still doing in-person classes here at the university, and also some of our classes are online. So I also tend to be getting more work done up here than at my house. And probably on a day like today, this is probably a better place to be because I'd probably be pretty distracted because I think something's going on in the news right now. So I appreciate you taking a moment to be distracted from all that's going on in the world, to jump on and learn a little bit about career readiness and my approach to it, but also the program that I've created. And so before we do that, though, I just want to give you a little bit of insight on what's going to happen today. I'm going to go through my slide and the slide deck, but the way I created this slide deck is to serve as a resource for you. And I provided them the slides and made them available. Ashford's going to take care of that. So there's a little more text on some of the slides than I normally would have in a presentation. But what I've noticed for these Zoom presentations, I've done a few things like this. It's helpful for you all to be able to have access to this later. Since I'll be kind of moving through it quickly. So feel free to not worry about taking notes real quick on everything on there. I just added a little bit of extra text on some of these slides. So if you want to go back, review this, you'll have access to it, and they'll make sure you have access to it as well after the presentation. So I just wanted to give you a heads up about that as we move forward. So I'm excited. And as Teresa said, I've been kind of straddling the academic and professional or industry side of things for a long time. And I think it's really important that professors and universities have a good understanding of what the current needs are in industry and also what the current needs are of our students. And I think sometimes we forget to do that, or we get a little lost in our silos and our worlds and our assessment and our other things we're doing, that sometimes we forget to kind of put our heads up above our trench to look over and see what's going on other places. So hopefully you'll see some of that come through today. But the first thing I always want to start out with when I'm talking about career readiness is the fact that I truly believe that nothing is more practical than a liberal arts education. And so the reason I point that out is I think that sometimes we've gotten a little lost from what the true mission of our liberal arts education is. And we are educating people to make them better humans, better societal members, functional humans, and really understand how to interact, communicate, and discuss and understand and problem solve all these important elements from the original liberal arts. That is why our education system was created and the foundations it was created on. And if you really look at what the liberal arts education provides, it provides a practical skill set and knowledge base for any major, any student, no matter what they're going to do after college. And I think sometimes I like to point that out because I honestly do believe that sometimes higher education has forgotten that. And I think sometimes we forget that larger purpose and goal. And yes, we get really focused on career readiness and jobs and what our students will be doing in regards to after college. But we also have to trust the fact that there's a macro level effect happening here with what a liberal arts education does. And when I speak to that, I really do think that higher education went wrong somewhere with career readiness. And I think a lot of it has to do because we forgot the fact of what a true liberal arts education can do and the value it provides in terms of making people employable. But I always tell my students, the job of a university is not to get you a job. That's not our job at all. Now we'll get you prepared so that you are a good employee, that you're hireable, you're promotable, and you're trainable. But we're also going to hopefully shape you in a way that'll allow you to enter industry and be a great employee, but also a great community member and serve that purpose. But I do believe somewhere along the line, we decided that choosing a job was more important than really educating the student. And that scares me a little bit. And I always wonder why we think it's a good idea to have a student choose a singular job and reverse engineer their entire life to that. And when we think about it that way, it's kind of a strange thing because they're choosing a job for someone that really doesn't exist yet. If I'm teaching a 20-year-old, they don't know who they'll be or how they'll be at age 35. So in some ways, we're kind of turning college into a really expensive vocational school, really just zeroing in on these micro level skills that are associated with a very particular major. And I don't think that's necessarily always a bad thing, but I don't think it should be the primary focus. And so in an effort to make the job the focus, and that has kind of made us stop paying attention to some of those larger liberal arts skills. And I really wanted to find a way to kind of not just help students, with their career path, but also help students understand the value of a college degree and recognize that though college does not guarantee you a job or a better life, it does give you potential for that, and to really understand how an education can make you a standout. Because I do believe that there's not one path to a career, but in many ways, higher education has created this situation where we've made almost an assembly line or a singular path. And there are some majors and jobs out there that, yes, they have a much more direct route, but someone who teaches in a field like mine, that's not the case. In communication studies, our students do many, many things. There's some obvious communication jobs that might come to mind, like PR or journalism, but our students work in a variety of industries because we have a more general degree. And I think there's a lot of folks in the liberal arts and social sciences that can say the same, whether you're in sociology or English or psychology, philosophy, history. There are a lot of students who don't have that privilege to have a very singular assembly line, strict, easy, direct path. And I think that's what we need to recognize. Education and career readiness is not an assembly line. And so with that being said, there's more to education and career readiness than simply finding a job. And that's what I'm trying to do. Now, I'll be honest, I have to trick my students a little bit and their parents on recruitment days. I don't necessarily tell them this. We get them in with this idea of career readiness, but in a lot of ways, it's kind of personal development and self-awareness that we start with. And I'll talk through some of that. But I think we've been doing it wrong. And what has worked in the past is not really working now. Think about how many jobs that our students will have that don't even exist yet. So we need to adapt to the world we're a part of and to the society we're a part of now. We're leaving out a vital part of the educational process when it comes to career readiness. And I honestly do believe that vital part of that process is the student. And that's why I say it's important for us to start with them and really dig into their interests, passions, that self-awareness aspect, and get them to understand what their interests, passions, skills are that they need to work on or improve, but also things that they're good at as well. And that's really the foundation of all this, is the student. And I'm going to talk to you today about why I believe most universities' career readiness programs are only helpful for some of their students, not the majority, how I decided to challenge the system a little bit and why I think that challenge is needed. And then I'm going to provide you with some best practices that will hopefully help you figure out how to better prepare your students. Because I really do think it's time to disrupt the system. Higher education in so many ways has been doing the same thing for a long time, but I think it's time for us to disrupt the system a little bit and really kind of recenter ourselves around the current needs of our students in that regard. Now, but before I do that, I just do want to point out that everything I'm going to talk about today, though it's going to be framed almost like a case study around what I've done in our program, I want you to know that a lot of this is adaptable. And that is the key to this, is it needs to be adapted to your students, your programs, your degree plans, your classes. All of this is adaptable. And I think some of the best practices that I point out and some of the research I've done on this will help you understand that. But for example, our students, we have mostly first generation students. We are a minority majority institution, and we also serve a lot of veterans because we are very close to San Antonio. So after returning from deployment, a lot of students also come up from San Antonio and work with us. So we have a variety of types of students at this university. We obviously have our traditional students as well. But what I've found is that some of what I'm going to talk about today is very much highly tailored to those students and the type of students we have. And that's important for you to recognize as well. Also, I built this in a communication program. So you're going to have to think a little bit about how this might apply for those of you who might be in political science or philosophy or English or whatever department you may be a part of. But before I do that, you're probably wondering, dude, where did this obsession come from? And that's a good question because I am a little obsessed with it. It became this kind of just burning question I had all the time of, what is going on with career readiness? Why do I feel like my students are not as prepared as they should be? Why are they asking me the questions that they're asking me when they come to me and say like, oh, it's time to get a job, or I'm graduating, I don't know where to start, I don't know what I can do. And when you say things like, well, you have a communication degree, you could do anything, they panic. Kind of paralysis by choice, if you will. So I started to dig into that more. They could talk about what they did in their classes, but they couldn't really talk about how that applies to the real world or what that looks like, or even to where to begin the job search process. And I think a lot of faculty, and I know mine for sure, we were taking this for granted and making an assumption that these students knew how to navigate that or just would figure it out on their own. And to be honest, they don't. Now, before that, I started thinking about what has gone on in my life in terms of my career path. And I did not have a traditional career path in the slightest. And I've done a lot of different things, and you've heard a little bit about that in my bio. And when I thought back to this and why I chose communication studies in the first place as an undergrad, I'm one of the few people that came in as a freshman and kept their major all the way through and decided to get a PhD in it. But The one thing that I wanted to point out is I realized I didn't have this traditional career path, and I was really motivated by the fact that I could do a lot of things with this degree. And I don't think that's the case anymore for our current students in regards to comm. But then I started to realize that throughout my time of trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life, I was always told, here's what you do with the communication degree. Here's what you do. Here's what you do. You should go into TV. You should be a journalist. You should be on air. You should do those things. And I did have an interest in media, but I didn't want to be a journalist. And so I luckily had some conversations with a really great advisor that said there's a lot more you can do in media than just be a journalist. And that's kind of where this went. And I started to kind of design my own pathway to make sure I could still work in the media industry while not being a journalist. And I found out and did the proper research, found the right experiences, had the right internships, talked to the right people to know how to do that and how to really see how my knowledge and background in communication, along with the skills I've learned, would help me with that. And also what interests and passions I've had that would help me kind of go down that route. And that's how I found logistics in media, and eventually worked and still do on the side with the Today Show on their logistics team. And so when I thought back about this, I kind of always been the person who's bucked the system a little bit and said, well, why? Why do you have to have this? Why do you have to have that degree? Or why do I have to do that? And so in some ways I'm a troublemaker, and that's okay. And in some ways that probably drives my chair or my dean a little crazy, but that's also how different programs like this come to be. And also I think it's a time with Generation Z for us to think through that a little bit. And I think they're probably feeling some of the similar feelings, especially if they're getting a degree that's traditionally in the liberal arts or social sciences. I think they're feeling some of those same frustrations I felt. So I always think it's helpful to give you a little bit of background of why I obsessed over this. And it wasn't just because I was asked to build a program. It's honestly because I thought it was needed and I wanted to. All right, so what do we do? What is the solution? What is the solution if our students are struggling with career readiness, where to start, and if it's something that Gen Z's having difficulty with? And that was the question I asked myself. And so there's a few things that I started to dig into, and I kind of want to walk you through what I did to get a sense of the state of affairs in terms of career readiness. And so I started to ask other questions. I thought, what does the National Association of Colleges and Employers say about career readiness? What does research say about it? What do our alumni do? And I don't mean where they work. I wanted to know what they do. What are the most valuable skills? What are the most helpful skills? What did they learn? What about their degrees are they really applying? And then finally, what will faculty think? Because there's a little bit of danger when you walk into a faculty meeting and say, hey, I think we've been doing it wrong. We know, and I'm a faculty member, I get it. We might have fragile egos just a little bit. So what are they going to think if I walk in and think we need to change things? But here's the other side of that. Most faculty, and at least in our department, they're doing really great things. So we didn't have to change much. We maybe did have to change a little bit about how we present information or talk about information. So I'll dig into this a little bit. So let's start with what NACE says. Just if you're curious, what they say is that career readiness is the attainment and demonstration of requisite competencies that broadly prepare college graduates for a successful transition into the workplace. Now, I want to point something out about this definition when I saw this. Notice it says for a successful transition into the workplace. And to me, immediately I thought, yes, that's what we're doing with the liberal arts education, is we're helping them transition out of one point of their life into another point to become people who are employable, who are functioning, and who are good humans, right? That's part of that. How do we broadly prepare them? And you notice it doesn't get into this specific things like you must be trained to do X, Y, Z for your major. It doesn't say that, because in reality, when you get a job, there's on-the-job training. You need to be trainable. And yes, there are certain degree plans that require very specific accreditation or certain things you have to know, and that's going to happen. But a lot of what you're going to do, you're trained by the organization itself. And so I liked that they had this kind of broad idea of what career readiness really was. And it goes back to these level of competencies. So you're probably curious, what are the competencies? And these are the competencies that NACE lays out that says students should be capable of doing. And if you look at this list, these are things that happen in the liberal arts education. And for a lot of institutions and universities, in our general education or our core, depending on how whatever school you're at and what they talk about it and how they talk about it, we call it Gen Ed here. This is where we try to address those things. But what's interesting is, why do we only try to address these things in our general education or in just certain classes? Aren't these competencies that should be sprinkled throughout the curriculum? And I think you can look at these, and yes, some of these are sprinkled out throughout, or at least discussions are. But I don't know if we're actually teaching those competencies as much as we think we are, or as often as we are we just talking about them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But when I looked at these competencies, I also saw that this aligned with what we do in a liberal arts education. And again, they're recognizing these skill sets that are much broader than just the specific skill sets assigned to specific majors. Not that those aren't important, I'm not trying to say that, but we have to recognize that there are certain competencies that employers want all people to be able to do. And if you look at any job description, no matter the industry, and I have done it, I've scoured LinkedIn, these things pop up in every industry for every type of job, not just communication. So I think it's important to just see these and recognize those. So after I did that, I started digging into more of the research. And that's where I started to see what academics say about it. And to be honest, academic research was not that helpful in regard to a solution, but it did help me understand the problems a little more. And I'm going to talk more about the problems I found in that in the next slide. But it did give me a sense that, all right, we are recognizing some trends and some issues that are important for us to talk about. And I looked through a lot of different, a lot of higher education research, communication research, and other social sciences and things as I was digging through that. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But also what was interesting is we do think we teach the NACE competencies, but we don't really. We might assess them, or we might ask them questions on an exam about it, but it's not as often that we are actually doing those things or practicing those skills. Maybe we're talking about them, but are we really engaging our students in activities, assignments, or whatever it might be that really puts those competencies to the test? And what we know is our students, especially the current generation, they struggle with things like critical thinking and problem solving. They hit one hurdle or one barrier and they kind of shut down. I'm teaching a fully online class right now that is 400 students. It's a freshman level class, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this. No matter what I say in my video or in the syllabus or on the assignment, they meet a barrier. Instead of going and seeking out the information, they're just shooting me an email immediately. They reached one barrier, they gave up, when there's a lot of access points for that information. And that seems to be a trend everywhere, not just, in the online world either, but just one example of that in terms of how are we really teaching them critical thinking? And I also think we assume they know a lot of these things or can do a lot of these things coming into college. And a lot has changed. I've also learned from the research in education pre-college. We are in the middle of a generation that is been completely through No Child Left Behind, which means they have been in standardized test form and taught to the test for decades. And they might not necessarily know how to learn, but they do know how to memorize, or they have learned the process of getting a good score, not necessarily the skill set. So that was pretty fascinating as I read through some of this research. And there was actually a lot of fascinating insight from popular press books and articles when I started to research why people switch careers or have little breakdowns midlife or whatever. There was some really cool insight that actually really pushed towards the value of a more general degree. There's a book called Range by David Epstein, and he talks about the value of being a generalist in that we argue that we specialize too early. And I really love that book because it does really embrace folks who are interested in degree plans that do give you a little more variety and don't necessarily have the same type of direct pathway to a job as others. So let me show you, I organized these into two areas, the problems that I found from the research. There's kind of a macro level issues and micro level issues. The first one is most career readiness programs are one size fits all. I scoured hundreds of universities' career readiness programs across the country, and it really is a one size fits all. And it's kind of designed mostly for those majors that have really direct outcomes. So if you want to If you major in accounting, you're probably going to apply to be an accountant somewhere. Or if you're going to be a nurse, if you're going to major in nursing, you're going to be a nurse, so on and so forth. That doesn't fit for all degree plans. And so that's a big issue. There's a different type of advising required for different types of majors in terms of career readiness. We start with the job rather than the student. So, hey, pick a job. And you're even seeing this in magnet high schools and things. Just in Austin, up the road from us, we're about 25 miles from Austin. They just opened a pre-law high school. So at 14, students are saying they want to be lawyers. I know I wasn't even thinking about things like that at age 14. And is that necessarily a good thing? So we're picking these jobs first rather than allowing the student to really explore and be self-aware and kind of dig into their interest and foundations to make better choices, which that then results in people specializing too early. And when we specialize too early, we're kind of on this direct path. We aren't getting as much experience, and it's not giving us this opportunity to pivot, which means make adjustments along the way, and we're kind of stuck on that assembly line. So there is this key, and this is talked about in range a lot, about specializing too early can be problematic. And what we know are people who do specialize early, they outperform generalists at first, but when you look long-term, the generalist does outperform the specialist. We exclude majors that do not have specific career paths, as I mentioned. We don't value the generalists. I brought that up already. We treat symptoms and not problems. And what I mean by that is we keep patchworking our solutions to things. And so we're addressing a symptom rather than the sickness itself, right? And that symptom that's a symptom of a problem, but not the actual problem. That we have a whole different type of need in the world, different types of jobs, and even our students have different needs than before. And so these kind of patchworky ways of maybe just like, let's throw a new class in there. Well, maybe that's just a solution to a symptom and not reevaluating how we advise or our whole curriculum. That might be the problem that's actually happening. Core is something to get out of the way, or gen ed. I hear that all the time from even our academic advisors, just get it out of the way, get it out of the way. So when you talk about the classes that primarily focus on the liberal arts piece of our education, and we say get them out of the way, they're going to treat them as something to get out of the way. Students need access to networks. That's a big problem. We might have alumni, but how do we give them access? And do we do a good job at that? And for most schools, no. Some of the Ivy Leagues, you purchase a network, but that's not the case for most state schools or other types of schools. And then a lot of faculty don't have industry experience. And we're starting to see a trend in a lot of liberal arts or social sciences where folks are going straight through from undergrad to master's to PhD or whatever that might be. And that's not necessarily, I'm saying, a bad thing. It's great for researchers. There's benefits that they're brilliant people. But we're seeing fewer faculty in some fields. I'm not speaking for all that just don't have as much industry experience. So of course the conversations aren't going to go that route if they don't have the access to industry. Some of the micro level problems that you might know from your students do not see how their courses are connected. They see it more like a checklist, check, 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 but there is a reason why we have a series of courses in place, and can they articulate that? And have we ever talked to them about that? What is the narrative those courses say about that student? Students do not connect the course material to jobs, so they aren't making that leap like we assume they are. So we need to take that opportunity to do that. But if a lot of us haven't been in the industry for a while, that could be problematic. So what are things we can do to help with that? Students lack critical thinking skills. I mentioned this already, that critical thinking element's kind of being sucked out of them, especially since even though they're a generation that have access to more information than any other in history, doesn't necessarily mean they're using it. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think we've seen that kind of surface level approach to a lot of the research as well. Students may have more, or students are not trained to pivot. And I mentioned this already as well, but students should be digging and finding more and more experiences that they can, so they can continually pivot and understand that I liked this was cool. I want to learn more about it. We pivot a little bit. So that means their career path is kind of like a wacky map all over the place. There's a lot of, it's not the Google kind of map where it's like, plug it in, get me to the destination as fast as possible. It allows for those detours, and that's important and should be encouraged. Students have difficulty articulating the value of the degree outside of just getting a job. And I think that was really interesting to me. And I dug in a lot of that and spend a lot of time with my students on this now, is that they aren't really great at saying, this is the value of a communication degree, other than it gets me a job. No, why do we need communication, and why do organizations and people and humans, what about that? And finally, students aren't taking advantage of the career services they do have. When I called and talked to different career services around the country, they're like, "Oh yeah, we don't get that. We don't get as many people as you'd think." But the funny thing is, most students are paying for these services, not taking advantage of it. So these are some of and again, these are trends. This might not be true for your institution or for every student, but something that I wanted to point out that were trends. So then we talked to the alumni, and what was really interesting about that is current methods of career advising don't work for most of our alum, and they talked about that. They said, yeah, career services wasn't that helpful because I didn't have a clear path to what I wanted to do. So that supported what we thought. They talked about how you just need to be trainable, and how they were very happy that their degree plan allowed them to be good people that could be trained, and that they had no problem, learning new things and being willing to and being able to adapt, and really went back to all these NACE competencies. Now, they didn't know what the NACE competencies were, but they talked about things like critical thinking and problem solving, and professionalism and ethics and whatnot. They realized they actually learned the process of getting good grades, and they pointed that out. They said, I didn't know I wasn't really learning. A lot of times I was just learning the process so I'd get a good grade. And then there were certain classes that really were like, that changed me, or like, that's where it kind of hit, or I actually learned so much from this class, even though I got a C in it, so they talked in that regard. And they talked about there's a need for more learning by doing, that they wish they had more projects, more applied things, did more case studies, or saw really clearly how this went into play. And this wasn't necessarily to be about, this is how you use this in your job, but they wanted to see it kind of in real life. And there's, ways to integrate that into our most curriculums. And then they did not feel confident in their degree. They said, I left and I didn't feel ready. I didn't feel confident. I didn't know what to be ready for. And that kind of aligned with some of those problems I talked about earlier. Now, the final group I had to talk to was faculty. And I'll be honest, this was the toughest group to talk to, because I wanted to approach this, share with them what we know, but to also let them know, I know they're good teachers. I know they're good at their job, but this is something we're dealing with. And then talking with them, they actually were really open to this, because, I started that way and said, hey, listen, this is what we know. Here's a problem we're having. How can we address this? And so we brainstormed as a faculty, and I led them through some workshops for this. We have this day called Day of Dialogue. Sounds more exciting than it is. It's just a really long faculty meeting, but we did this one day of dialogue. And what we decided to try is to create a program and plan that integrates a new style of career readiness into the curriculum and the extracurricular opportunities that addresses our students' unique needs, and back to that unique needs. So this is what we decided to try. So this does not mean we change our curriculum to match buzzwords. That's a symptom treatment. We weren't like, oh my gosh, let's just add all these classes that are like, oh, people do this now in industry. You don't need to do that, right? There's still a lot of value in what we're doing in the foundations, but there's ways to talk about it. So stick to what you're good at while actively reminding students why what they are learning in class is valuable to employers, right? And so how do we integrate that? That was more of the problem treatment, is thinking about how we integrate that throughout the entire curriculum. I always talk about with diversity or ethics. Those are things that should be integrated in every class, every discussion, not just a one day day on diversity. Doesn't work. Same thing with this. Work on having students articulate the value of what they are learning and have them connect the dots. So connect the dots, destroy the silo mentality. And so it was even important to have them articulate why classes outside of our department are important for what they're going to do and can do, right? So we talked through that and get them to articulate and see those connections and make them connect the dots and make those arguments. Find ways to help them learn by doing more, help students, what I call hack their education, and that's practice that pivoting. And the idea behind that is to find what I like to call match quality, and what also Epstein and Range calls match quality, is this idea that if we pivot and are always adjusting and kind of going and creating our path as we go and learning along the way, we're able to find jobs and a career path that will have that'll be high quality and be meaningful to us. And that's what we're looking for. And finally, help students build their networks. And that was really important. How do we take advantage of our alumni, and how do we help them get out there and to talk to people? Because think about it. our students are mostly first gen. They don't have a large network of people who have jobs in the industries they're trying to get into because they're the first people in their family to go to college. And at our institution, many of our students are first generation Americans as well. They have immigrated here from mostly Mexico. So they are in a situation where they are starting to build a network from scratch. So how can we help them with that? And so what came out of that, here's part one of the solution. This was our Career Readiness Program. And basically what our Career Readiness Program is an innovative experience for select students to discover and examine career options in the communication field by building a personalized career pathway comprised of hands-on experience, alumni mentoring, networking, internships, and specialized advising. And yes, it says select students because it's a newer program. There's only one of me at the moment. And so we're really trying to do this well. We take about 15 students into the program each year, 10 to 15, and then they stay in the program until they graduate. And we're really trying to track this to create something that's scalable eventually, but we're still in that early process of kind of learning through what our mistakes are and whatnot. That's why it says select and they do apply for it. But hopefully one day it goes much larger than that. But again, you'll notice some of those words in there are representative of what I was talking about. And then some of the benefits of this program that we created, more of the formalized kind of part one of the solution. We enrolled students into an exclusive career readiness course. That's the only course that we added. And our undergrads take this course, and that is the course where they really dig into perfect world, their beginning of their sophomore year, dig into their who they are, their interests, their foundations. There's a lot of different books, and I'm happy to provide the syllabus if any of you want that. You can, I can send that to you to really start digging into that. We talk about communication, what it is. They have to define it and defend it, and they have to create a pathway. And that's where they get assigned their alumni mentors. They go to workshops, networking events. We kind of plan all that through a 3-credit-hour course. And from there, once they're done with the course, they're still in the program. We have steps in place for them to continue to be advised and take part in these different activities. The Alumni Mentor Program has been amazing. The students love it. I have over 100 mentors that signed up within 24 hours when I put the call out. So there were alumni who really wanted to help and give back. It really wasn't hard to recruit them like I thought it was going to be. We participate in exclusive workshops and networking opportunities. And I have a lot of our alumni mentors lead the workshops. They're the ones there, so they're the ones doing that. They receive specialized internship coaching, specialized academic advising, specialized career advising. And so I kind of work as the bridge between our academic advisors and our career advisors. And what we know is those experiences can be much better because these students have a much better idea of kind of what they want to learn or what next experience they want to have, so they can continually pivot. They build a personalized career pathway that guides them. That's a living document. And every semester when they meet with me, they bring that up and it changes and it adapts because they've learned new things, they've pivoted, and things might need to change a little bit. And finally, they receive specialized job training as well as they start to realize more and more of what they want to do. As they specialize later. Now, part two, this was integrating it into other classes. And basically, we informed the faculty on the NACE competencies and the skills our alumni say they use and are valued in their industry. And the faculty loved it. And they're like, yeah, we do this. We can do this. This is not hard. Awesome, right? It was easy. They're like, well, we kind of already talk about these things. I can do a better job at connecting the dots or engaging them in activities or bringing in different levels of that into already existing projects or presentations or whatever they're doing to help practice those skills more. It was pretty easy. They recognize not every course has to do all of those things. And I think that's important to point out. You don't have to try to cram all of this into every single course, or maybe you're only selecting certain things for certain courses. That's fine too. But we wanted to see where it had a natural fit as well. Because we also didn't want to create this kind of bogus like feeling assessment situation where it seems standardized, because that defeats the whole purpose. Brainstorm ways you can show students how your course prepares them for the jobs, help connect the dots. And I told them, we have all these alum that are willing to help. So ask them if they want to come to your class, call them up, talk to them so you can give real life examples, ask them to do a video, whatever it might be. If you don't know, find out for yourself, do a little bit of that homework. Decide if and how it can be part of your assignments in your discussions. I mentioned this natural fit already. And finally, we approach it as something that should be integrated throughout the course, not just one day, as I mentioned before. And so we talked about this and we took it seriously because we recognized the need and the faculty was really open to it, and it seemed to work well. So here's some of the outcomes we've experienced so far. And granted, we're only in about, we're starting in our year 3 of this, but here's some of the outcomes that we've been tracking and that we've noticed. We've created and curated an alumni network made up of over 100 alumni volunteers who participate in one-on-one mentoring, speaking, engagements, you name it. That has been awesome. And it's also great for us in terms to engage our alumni, because I noticed our alumni, they only get called up when people want money from them. But a lot of our alumni are young. And what we recognize is young alumni are great mentors because they're just doing this. And they might not have money to give, but they do have time and they have other resources like a network. And that has been so great. And we have other alumni who've been out for a long time also participating, but you can engage any alumni at any level. It doesn't have to be your highly, highly successful ones. It can really be people who are just a couple years out too. We integrated career readiness conversations and or assignments in all of our courses in the department at some level. We've achieved 100% internship placement for our career readiness students. I mean, granted, I only have 15 per cohort, but they all got internships. Now, some of them lost them when COVID hit and are getting them back now, but we all had 100% placement pre-COVID, and those folks who lost it, those organizations have called them back now that they started their programs back up. We've increased student engagement with faculty and alumni. So that's been really helpful because our faculty come to these events and workshops, and it's a way for our students to get to know other faculty members and build their network with them as well. Students can clearly explain their skill sets, interests, and passions, and how their degree has prepared them for their chosen career, whatever that might be. And here's the thing. Notice we say career, not job. There's a career pathway. We still aren't telling students they have to kind of pick a specific job. We're letting these experiences kind of allow them to continually learn and experience new things and explore new options through internships. And then, what will eventually be the first job that they have. And then the idea is that we want them to continue that kind of mindset post-graduation in their first job to continue to seek out these opportunities to learn and to be constant learners so they can continually pivot and continually work towards match quality. Students can clearly explain how their courses inform each other, which has been awesome because I'd be like, you learned this in this class. And they'd be like, I did. Well, now they are seeing how it all connects and aligns. And that has just changed our discussions in classes immensely. Now, both academic and career advisors report more productive meetings as well, which I love that. They said, our students in career readiness come in, they know what our courses are like, they know how it fits together, they have reasons why they want to take these courses. So that's great for the academic advisors. And when they go into the career advisors, they aren't just walking and be like, I don't know what to do, or I need a job, right? That's a lot tougher conversation. If they come in with a little bit of a direction, that conversation is so much more fruitful. But the more important outcomes to me, and I guess this is the educator in me, our students feel empowered. And they feel really proud. And I love that. I have students, for example, I have a student right now, Claudia, who is, she's a single mom. She was in college, had a baby and came back 5 years later now that her child is 5. And she was so timid and worried and really kind of unsure of herself and lacked self-confidence. And we just, I actually had a meeting with her this morning. She's in my internship class right now because she's got an internship. And she was just talking about this, and it is so cool to see how much she's changed in the few years she's been doing this. And it is this proud feeling, and she feels empowered, and she knows she's capable. And we have so many of those examples, and that's been really fun for us. Students are excited by all of the choices now instead of paralyzed by it. They get excited, they see that, but they also know how to narrow their choices a little differently because they have identified their foundations and a direction, and they have people other than just professors to talk to about what the possibilities are with their alumni mentors. And finally, students are taking the first of many steps that will allow them to continually pivot and search for match quality. And we've really dug that mentality into them so that they see that this is something you got to continually do so that, you can continually evolve in your career path, even after graduation. 20 years from now, you can continually do this, especially because we know that idea of being in the same job for 40 years is kind of out the window nowadays. So here's some just best practices, and I'm not gonna, dive into all of these completely because I've talked a lot of this. This is more of like a summary for you. But again, just remember, don't start with the question, what do you want to do when you grow up? Start with who are you? And really dig into that and think about and get them to articulate those interests and where they spend their time, what excites them, what they need to work on. A lot of our students also avoid, like if they're not great speakers, they avoid our classes that are more speaking based. Those are actually absolutely the classes you should be taking to improve your speaking skills. So think of it that way. We embrace that there's no one size fits all, every solution for all students or majors, and really embrace that for your students. Avoid creating a program that cannot adapt. We know that the world's going to change. And we know the world's just right now with COVID, everything's changed. And it's amazing what I'm learning from our alumni about how what we know about certain careers have changed, or certain pathways, or certain skills that are needed. So you don't want something that's too rigid. You want to be able to have some flexibility there and be able to continue. Plus, if you're putting resources in it, you want it to last long. I already mentioned about starting with the student, help them identify opportunities and paths that'll help them find that match quality. So we do a lot of things where we look for extracurriculars, job shadowing opportunities, or even the way we talk about part-time jobs. I had a student who is interested in healthcare. I said, well, instead of working at Target, why don't you try getting a part-time job at the hospital's cafeteria? And so that's what she did. She's a cashier at the cafeteria, but she's able to have conversations every day with people who work at the local hospital. And she actually got an internship because of that, because she would have these conversations, ask people what they do. So sometimes just having them think, like, get yourself in the arena, the area, right? How can you get a little closer to an industry that you might be interested in? Don't assume the students connect the dots, because they don't. You sometimes got to force them to do that and make them articulate that. Have students we focus on short-term goals rather than the long-term. So that allows for that pivoting opportunity. And then we encourage this pivoting because we think they'll be more prepared for what we talk about as the wicked world. What we've done in education is we created this system where we prepare them for a kind world where everything's predictable, where the environment's predictable and things happen. As long as you do it over and over again, you'll be fine. And we know once you get in the real world, that's not the case. There's a lot of factors. So we want to prepare them. I know it sounds a little evil, but for the wicked world, just to be able to adapt, to be flexible and ready for it. And finally, include and educate faculty, integrate throughout your courses, partner with other units on campus. That's been so helpful to not reinvent the wheel. I partner with a lot of other groups on campus. I've been starting to work with other departments as well, who want to do similar things. So share your ideas, take advantage of your alumni, network. That networking and getting the students involved in a network and to hear from other people has been so fun and so beneficial. Identify opportunities outside of the classroom, like I mentioned, figure out what those could be, whether they're workshops, job shadowing, or whatever, student organizations, could be a lot of things. Have them create a pathway that is a living document willing to change. And then just treat this as experience. We do know from Gen Z, they want more experiential learning and want to have an experience. And that's been really fun for us to do. I actually met with a generational research marketing company up in Austin during all this as well. And that was a big thing they talked about with Gen Z, is having these experiences. There's a way to also get some longitudinal data out there for those data junkies and those of you who are really into assessment. We're doing that as well to kind of watch and assess this in the long term. And finally, we use a common language and we educate each other on it. And that way they're hearing similar messaging throughout all of this. And so what I want to end with before questions is my students, the first cohort, they kind of made this little gift for me, and they put this Socrates quote on it that said, to find yourself is to think for yourself. And they all said that because of Career Readiness, it was the first time in their life they actually felt like they thought for themselves for the first time. So that was really helpful to hear that, and meaningful, because in a lot of ways that's what we're doing and what we should be doing with these liberal arts degrees, preparing good humans to think for themselves. So that's all I got. That's the preview, and I gave you a lot of information, so I'm happy to take questions from here and dig in a little deeper. And again, I'm happy to share any documents with you too.
Thank you so much, Michael, for walking us through your research and discovery process, building a coalition of willing faculty and student support staff, and the outcomes you found with this program. I've seen lots of really positive comments in the chat, and I noticed that Haley has just reminded everyone, if you have any questions you'd like to ask Dr. Burns, feel free to post them in the chat. For now, though, I have several questions, so I can
Sure.
kick things off. You mentioned, or you described a bit about Texas State's student demographics. So minority majority, many first generation college students, first generation Americans. And, you know, in a lot of ways, why it's so nice to have you here at Ashford is that there are several similarities in our student populations. I'm curious, though, how your experiences at other institutions have informed your decisions for this program here, and what differences you've noticed in how students are approaching career readiness in general. So you've taught at North Dakota State, you've taught at, I can't remember the name of the school in Boston, do you find that students at these different institutions have had a different approach to thinking about their careers in the context of their academic experience from your students here? And how are you kind of working through those differences?
Right. Well, and I'll point this out. So I think too, I've noticed there's been a shift, right? So some of this is, yes, institutional, but some of it I think has changed just generationally. So when I was teaching at NDSU in North Dakota, that was mid 2000s, I guess 2008 is when I was there. And what I noticed there, like I've noticed a difference between those students and these students in the fact that they were much more inclined to kind of do some of this work on their own or know that. So I think that I've seen a shift as I teach longer, I started teaching in 2005, actually, even prior to North Dakota at this institution. I got my master's at this institution. I was a teaching assistant here and taught in 2005. And, you know, I've seen a massive shift in just the students in general in terms of what they're capable of. And I think that's because these students that we currently have, again, like I mentioned, have been brought through a standardized testing life, you know, throughout from the start. They're no child left behind kids. Like that's just how it is. So I think there's that element. I've seen a shift and a change, and society and technology has changed immensely. So I think that we have access to more jobs out there and to apply to more jobs. So that becomes more overwhelming. There's a lot going on. Plus there was a recession in the meantime. I mean, there's a lot that these students have experienced and saw. Now, from institution to institution, the small institution that I worked at in Boston, LaSalle University, small liberal arts school, very expensive to go to, only 1,400 students total, very wealthy group of students that go there. They already have a network. Their parents are very, very networked in. So it was very easy for us to have an internship requirement because no student ever had a problem finding one because, you know, somebody just made a call. And so you have to kind of recognize that. And to be honest, there's some advantages to that, but there's also some disadvantages too, in terms of what the students knowing about themselves. And a lot of times when students come in and are not, and maybe have a very well-established family that has gone to college a lot and have kind of this family route into jobs, right? It's a different type of conversation. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that they also have different needs as well, or different things they need to articulate. So I think you kind of have to look at it a little differently. This institution is by far the poorest in terms of student population I've ever worked with. We have a lot of students on grants. We have a lot of students who are here on special programming based on income. And so what I love about this is they are also much harder workers than a lot of my other students who don't have those, who have different opportunities. So I love that our students, when I tell them and give them a little bit of a push or know what they feel like they can do something, they bust their butts, which I love. I took some of my students to the last Olympics with me, and I always say my Texas State students ran circles around my Harvard students because they were hard workers and they had no problem kind of diving into the work. So I think you have to recognize that there are all universities kind of have different demographics there, and some are maybe advantages and some might be disadvantages, but I think it's kind of twofold, not just what type of student you get or what the demographics, how they trend, but also how our students have changed over time, if that makes sense.
Very much. To follow up, do you find a sense of willingness or unwillingness among your students to conceive of this idea of pivoting? Because it could seem to students very unstable, especially those who are, first generation college, have very specific financial goals that they want to attain. How do you convince them that it's okay to change your mind?
I don't sell them on that. That's kind of like get them in the door, foot in the door, and then we bring that in, we ease them into it. But what's interesting for us and with our degree plan, and this might be true for other degree plans that are more general like mine, when they see the value of pivoting and how it allows them to figure out and specialize and get a better, it almost serves as a better purpose to get to those financial outcomes that they want quicker. If they are having these experiences, I kind of frame it that way, and they like it. And they also have a much easier time explaining to their parents what they can do and what they have done and what they're going to try to do with their degree. And so it does take a little bit of pushing, and we push them. And what's interesting is so many of our alum were kind of doing this already, and unknowingly they figured this out later. And so when they hear it from our alum talk about what they did and why, like really a degree like communication and others that are more general, like you are prepared to pivot, right? Like you're learning all these things that work in every industry. So you are actually like the perfect candidate for this type of approach. And so when they realize that and it clicks, they're all in. But yeah, it does take a little bit of time and easing it in. But again, we kind of approach that from a standpoint of how they are uniquely, they have a unique opportunity to be experts at that because of just what they're learning in general.
Well, I think this entire year has been one of pivoting and adapting and changing your mind. So on that note, and I understand there might be no answer to this question at this point, but you mentioned that several students who, had attained internships, of course, were impacted by COVID and are just getting back in the swing of things now. Can you speak at all to the future of your program in light of what probably is going to be very lasting changes from COVID?
Yeah, to be honest, we're trying to figure out how these changes and what we're learning about COVID, how that can be an opportunity. And I have had 4 students put together their own type of internship plan for a company and said, here's how I can do it remotely. What do you think? And it worked. So we've kind of are trying to, how can we take advantage of this remote life and they're able to get internships at other places besides local ones. And so there are some advantages there. And I've just been encouraging that we like push it out there. Like, let's ask, it doesn't hurt. Call them up, find them on LinkedIn, message them. The worst thing they'll do is say no, or they just won't respond. And so we've been kind of taking it on a proactive approach like that to try to see how to do this. And to be honest, we're learning that there's a lot of advantages to a comm degree, luckily for us, in this world where we're having to communicate very differently and interact very differently. We're already prepared for that. So we're pretty confident in it. And, I've had no problem filling cohorts or anything. And I think also people have a little bigger fear, like, will I get a job? So any way they can build their network and find a way to do that is they're taking advantage of it. Plus, we're kind of watching what industries are still hiring. There are some industries, and that sucks for some folks. Like we have a lot of folks that like to go into event planning. It's really hard to get an event planning job right now. So we kind of have to rethink, like, what else can you do that has similar skill sets? So when event planning is back up and running, you can easily make that jump back over. So let's figure out something, and maybe in tech or whatever, that will allow you to still have those transitional skills over. And so we've kind of framed it that way.
I think so much of what you just said speaks to so many goals of this conference. In fact, just happening concurrently right now is a panel discussion on fostering professional self-advocacy among students. So you talked about encouraging people to just write to somebody on LinkedIn and ask what's out there. But in order to do that, the student needs to feel confident in being able to articulate the skills that he or she has. And so often students kind of think that those don't exist until you have a degree, but they exist right now, right? So part of this challenge is making that clear for them.
Right. And they're students. So take advantage of your student status. People like to help students. So you can say, here's what I'm learning and here's what I want to do. Or I'm really fast. I would be really fascinated to hear how you got to where you are or what your journey was like, whatever that might be. And people will respond and help that student out. I mean, it's been amazing. Even folks that aren't alum of our institution, when you reach out and you kind of take advantage of that label that you are learning and you want to learn and you want to learn from them, people jump on it. And so we've seen much more positive feedback that way. And I think and there are some students that do that naturally. But I almost had to give our students permission to do that when I don't know why you'd have to do that, but like, that's fine. I'm happy to give that permission.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think on that very heartening note, this is a good place to close, that people want to help students. We want to help students, and there are lots of opportunities out there. So thank you, Michael, so much for sharing your research.
I
And
want to point out real quick, my email's up there too. If any of you listening, feel free to email me directly. I'm not offended by that. So I'm happy to help. If you want to look at my career readiness syllabus or whatever, the email's up there. Shoot me an email.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And quickly, I want to point folks to several other presentations that are happening today and tomorrow that are directly related to this content. At 1 today, there is a panel on recently graduated doctoral students about what do I do now with my degree? One of our professors in the doctoral program also is presenting about the value of guest speakers in classes, which speaks to, hearing from people active in the field and growing a network as well. So thank you again, and I will turn things back over to Haley.
Thank you so much, Teresa, and thank you, Dr. Burns, and thank you to the audience for your participation in today's session. We hope you'll take a moment to complete the brief feedback survey at the link posted in the chat, and we encourage you to join us for those presentations which Teresa just mentioned. Remember that you can access all presentations via the TLC online event page on Eventbrite, and you can continue the conversation and engage with conference participants on social media by using the hashtag #AUTLC. Please enjoy the rest of TLC.